Chapter 7. This is just going to be the first part of Chapter 7 because it's over 30 pages long, and I'll read you the second part tomorrow. The invited firework makers arrived the very next day, together with all the other famous artists and performers, the Chinese Scout and Guide Opera Company, Senor Archibaldo Gomez and his Filipino Mambo Orchestra, the Norwegian National Comedy cowbell players, and many others. They all disembarked from the SS Indescribable with their luggage and their instruments and their costumes, and began to rehearse at once. The first firework maker was Dr. Puffinflash from Heidelberg. He had invented a multi-stage rocket which exploded at the height of 2,000 feet into the shape of a gigantic Frankfurter sausage, while a huge instrument he'd invented played the Ride of the Valkyries. Herr Puffinflash had gone to immense trouble to prepare something just as spectacular for the New Year festival, and he supervised the unloading of his enormous equipment with scrupulous care. The second visiting firework maker was Signor Scorcini from Naples. His family had been making fireworks for generations, and his speciality was noise. For his display, he had invented a full-scale representation of a battle at sea, featuring the noisiest fireworks in the world, and with King Neptune emerging from the water to see fair play and declare peace. The third and last firework maker was Colonel Sam Sparkington from Chicago. His display was called the greatest fireworks show in the galaxy, and it usually featured Colonel Sparkington himself, wearing a white Stetson hat and riding a horse. This time, it was rumoured, he had invented an especially exciting display involving something never before seen in the art of pyrotechnics. And while the three visiting firework makers were assembling their displays, Louchant and Lila were working on theirs. Time flew past. They barely slept. They scarcely washed. They hardly ate. They mixed vats of golden serpents. They ordered 1.5 tons of flowers of salt. They invented something so new neither could think of a name for it until Lila said, "Foaming," and snapped her fingers. "Moss," said Louchant. "That's it." Lila showed Louchant her delayed fuse method, but it didn't work until he thought of adding some spirits of saltpetre, and then it worked magnificently. It would let them set off 50 or 100 fireworks at once, which had previously been impossible. Then Louchant came up with a spectacular finale, but it depended on something even more impossible, burning a fuse underwater. Lila solved that by thinking of caustic naphtha, and they tried it, and it worked. And before they knew it, the day of the festival arrived. "I wonder where Chuluk is," Lila said vaguely, but her mind was really on the foaming moss. "I hope Hamlet's being treated well," said Louchant, but he was really thinking about the caustic naphtha. And neither of them said anything about the king's decision, but they couldn't get it out of their minds. After a hasty sleep and a hurried breakfast, they loaded up the fried prawn seller's cart. He lent it to them because he was taking the day off, and trundled it through the streets to the Royal Park, where the displays were going to take place. The batik seller followed behind with another cart, and behind him came the sandalwood carver from down the street with a third, all laden with fireworks. But when they reached the ornamental lake, Lila and Louchant stopped in dismay. For there was Dr. Puffinflash supervising the final stages of putting together about 15 tons of equipment, all swathed in a neat tarpaulin and swarmed over by a dozen pyrotechnicians in white overalls with clipboards and stethoscopes. And next to him there was Signor Scorcini, clambering about on a model galleon even longer than the royal barge, all bristling with cannons and flares, whilst his Neapolitan crew were arguing and gesticulating in a Neapolitan dialect as they lowered a vast nodding, bearded model of King Neptune below the water. And next to him, Colonel Sparkington was rehearsing his display. There was a gigantic red, white and blue rocket with a saddle on the back of it, and a scaffolding platform high above the treetops, where there was a model of the moon, with dozens of craters all being loaded with exciting-looking things. It was too much. Louchant and Lila looked at the vast displays being prepared by the other artists, and then at their 3 little cartloads, and their hearts sank. "Never mind," said Louchant. "Ours is a good display, my love. Think of the foaming moss. They've got nothing like that." "Or the underwater fuse," said Lila. "Look, they're having to light that sea god by hand. We can do better than that, father." "Of course we can. Let's get to work." They unloaded their materials, and the batik painter and the sandalwood carver took their carts back with the promise of a free ticket to the show. The day passed quickly. All the firework makers were very curious about one another's displays, and kept wandering over to have a look, with the excuse of borrowing a handful of red fire powder or a length of slow fuse. They came to look at Louchen and Lila's, and they were very polite, but it was plain they didn't think much of it. And all of them were desperate to look under Dr. Puffenflush's tarpaulin, but he kept it tightly tied down. Promptly at 7 o'clock the sun went down, and 10 minutes later it was dark. People were beginning to arrive already, with rugs to sit on and picnic baskets, and from the palace nearby came the sound of bells and gongs and cymbals. All the firework makers were busy in the dark, putting the finishing touches to their displays, and they all wished one another good luck. Then came a roll of drums, and the palace gates were thrown open. By the light of 100 flickering torches, a great procession made its way to the grandstand by the lake. The king was being carried in a golden palanquin, and the royal dancers were swaying and stepping elegantly alongside. Behind them, decorated with gold cloths and jewels of every colour, with his tusks and toenails painted scarlet, came Hamlet. "Oh, look at the poor thing," said Lila. "He looks utterly miserable. I'm sure he's lost weight." "He's missing Chullock, that's what it is," said Louchend. Hamlet stood disconsolately beside the grandstand as the king declared the competition open. "A prize of a gold cup and 1,000 gold coins we awarded to the winner," the king proclaimed. "Only your applause will decide who has won. The first contestant will now begin his display." The firework makers had drawn lots to see which order they would perform in. Dr. Poofenflash was first. Of course the audience had no idea what to expect, and when his mighty rockets whizzed up into the night sky and his gigantic Bombarden Orgel mit Sparkenpuppen began to play the Ride of the Valkyries, hurling out great lumps of Teutonic lava, they all burst into oohs and ahs of excitement. Then came the highlight of his display. Out of the darkness arose a tribute to the king's favourite dish, a gigantic pink prawn, fizzing and sputtering, which began to revolve faster and faster until it all went out in a shower of salmon-coloured sparks, and a sonorous chord from the Bombard organ mit Sparkenpuppe. The applause was colossal. "That was good," said Lila apprehensively. "That big prawn, really big and pink." "A bit too obvious," said Louchend. "Don't worry. Nice and pink, though. Must ask him for that recipe." The next to go was Signor Scorcini, with his Neapolitan pyrotechnicians. Red, green, and white rockets whizzed up in the air to explode with enormous bangs that echoed all around the city, and the galleon came ablaze with sparklers and Catherine wheels, and a chorus of galley slaves made of Roman candles moved their oars stiffly to and fro. Suddenly a giant octopus rose out of the water, waving ghastly green tentacles, and attacked the ship. The sailors fired all kinds of jumping jacks and whizzers and incandescent fountains at it, and they tipped cascades of Greek fire over it from barrels lashed to the mast. The noise was indescribable. Just when it looked as if the ship was about to tip over, up came King Neptune, waving his trident, accompanied by 3 mermaids. The band struck up, and the mermaids sang a jolly Euro song called Boom Bang a Bang. The octopus waved its tentacles in time, and more rockets went off in rhythm with the music. The audience loved it. They roared with delight. "Oh dear," said Louchend. "That was very exciting. Oh dear, oh dear." "But didn't you see how they had to light the sea god?" Lila said. "They had to wait till he was right out of the water, and a little man in a boat reached up with a match. Just wait till they see our underwater fuse." When the applause had died down, Colonel Sparkington's display began. First, a lot of saucer-shaped fireworks whizzed down from the darkness and landed on the grass. That got a round of applause on its own, because fireworks normally went up, not down. Then the famous moon swung into view, way up above the treetops, and Colonel Sparkington galloped in on a white horse made of tiny Catherine wheels, waving his Stetson hat to the audience, who were in such a good mood they cheered and cheered. Lila could see an official beside the king carefully counting the seconds that each burst of applause lasted. She swallowed hard. Then came the climax of Colonel Sparkington's display. After stamping out the flying saucers with his Catherine wheel horse, the gallant colonel jumped aboard the red, white, and blue rocket. A Cherokee chieftain galloped in on a Palmino pony and fired a blazing arrow at the tail of the rocket, which ignited at once and whooshed up along a wire to the moon, with Colonel Sparkington waving his hat all the way. As soon as it landed, a dozen craters flipped open, and out came some little round-faced moon people with big eyes and pointed ears. The audience went wild. The moon people waved the flags of all nations and bowed to the king. Colonel Sparkington distributed rockets to them all, and they whizzed off in all directions, singing a song called Sparkington Forever. You could hear the clapping, the cheering, and whistling and stamping for miles around. We'll have to see what Lauchen and Lila's display is like next time.